Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm still getting used to the camera, so please be patient with me. But for my first video, I wanted to go over the books that I read from January to March. I wanted to do this video first so you guys could see all the books that I've read so far this year, other than the month of April. April will have its own wrap up. And also this way, when I do the end of year videos, and I talk about books I read in January, February, and March, they don't come as a surprise to anybody. I'm wanting to do this more rapid style, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details on the books. I will mostly be telling you the title, the author, the genre, the age category, a small synopsis of the book, and a little bit about my thoughts on the book. I read 21 books between January and March, 9 in January, 7 in February, and 5 in March. And if I don't want this video to be forever long, I'm going to need to get through them pretty quick. So let's just go ahead and get started. So the first book I finished this year was The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett. This is the first book in the Discworld series, and it's also the first book in the Rincewind sub-series. I don't really know what to call that part of it. This is an adult absurdist fantasy. Discworld, as a lot of you may know, is a flat world set on the back of 4 elephants that are on the back of a giant turtle. It's meant to be nonsensical. It's meant to be funny. It's meant to be ridiculous. And for me, it had its good parts, but then there were other parts I just wasn't quite as interested in. But I've also heard that that book is not one of his more popular books. It's not one that tends to be liked the best, even by people who have read a lot of Discworld. So I wasn't going to completely write off the series based on the one book. For me, it was good. It wasn't great, but it was good. The next book I read is I Am Hutterite by Mary Ann Kirkby. This is an adult nonfiction memoir in which Mary Ann Kirkby chronicles not only her growing up in a Hutterite society or Hutterite colony, but also her parents and her grandparents, how their colony got started, how their families grew up, things like that. This was a really, really good book. I love this one so much, and I had put this off for years, and I'm kind of sorry I did. Hutterites are not a group that I'm familiar with. I know they're partially in Canada, partially in, I believe, the northern part of the US, but not in an area that I live, not in an area where I would be familiar with them, at least as far as I'm aware. So this was really interesting to learn about, and this is a group that has similarities to Amish and Mennonite cultures. So if you're interested in any of those, I would recommend picking this one up. The next book that I picked up is Lone Wolf by Reka Clausen. This is a self-published novel, and Reka Clausen is the daughter of Chantel from Chantel Reads All Day here on BookTube, and this is her very first novel. It is fairly short, but it's about a boy who's living in the foster care system, and I believe at the start of the book he's on his 8th family, and he just wants to find a forever family. This was so well done, even more so because the author, I believe, was 13 at the time that she wrote and published this. I really enjoyed this, and I will be keeping this one on hand for my kids to read when they are older. The next book I read in January was Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells. This is the 3rd book in the Murderbot Diaries series, and this was my favorite book in the series so far. Honestly, I read the first book and I thought it was good. It was an interesting concept. It was an interesting idea. I liked how things played out, but I didn't love it the way so many people did. And I read the second book, still liked it, still didn't love it. This book I did, and I don't know what's different about this one, or if it's just that I'm getting more used to the humor in this book and actually starting to find it funny, amongst other things, but I really enjoyed this one. So I'm looking forward to continuing on with the series. The next book I finished was Cat Among the Pigeons by Agatha Christie. This particular book is a 4-book bind-up of 4 Hercule Poirot novels. And Cat Among the Pigeons is the last one that I hadn't gotten to. This was also a book that I read for Chantel's Agatha Christie's book club that she's hosting on her Patreon this year. How to describe this book. So at the very beginning, there is an American who is friends with a prince, and he and the prince end up getting killed. But his sister and her daughter are suspected of knowing something about some valuables that went missing. The daughter is attending a boarding school in England, an all-girls boarding school. And there seems to be somebody who is after information or is trying to find something. There's a dead body that turns up. There's some people trying to get into basically the gymnasium, and they're not sure why. Overall, I really enjoyed the mystery itself, which felt unusual for me because I'm not usually big on mysteries that have a big national or international potential consequence. But I actually enjoyed the mystery in this one, probably because most of it was set at a boarding school. And so even though there were international implications, most of it felt more local, which is more of what I like in my mysteries. However, this is considered a Hercule Poirot novel, and he doesn't show up in the novel until over halfway through. And I'll be honest, to me, it felt like he was there because they needed somebody to figure out what had happened. And Agatha Christie couldn't figure out how another character would be able to figure it out, so she threw Poirot into this one. That's almost what it feels like. Other than that, I really enjoyed it, but it does not feel like a Poirot novel. The next book that I finished was Holy Huga by Jamie Erickson. This one is a Christian nonfiction about applying Huga to Christian living. And there were a few chapters that I found really helpful. Obviously, I have several tabs in here. There were a few chapters I found very helpful. They gave me a lot of really good ideas, but there were several chapters that I feel like I personally didn't get a whole lot out of. And I don't know if that's just because of me and where I'm at right now in my life, or if they just really weren't as helpful. I don't know. I know there was one chapter, and I can't remember which one now, that I felt like the advice and information she was giving was stuff that I've already heard before. So some of this might be more common knowledge to some of you. Like I said, some of it was very helpful to me, especially the hospitality chapter. But overall, I would say it was good. Again, I didn't love it. It was good. Oh, I've been waiting to talk about this book. So the next book that I read was The Secret Diaries of Charlotte Bronte by Ciri James. And this was by far my favorite book that I read in the month of January. I don't know for sure yet if I can say it's my favorite book of the year. It would be up there though. But this book is about Charlotte Bronte's life. It's written with the viewpoint that Charlotte Bronte wrote diaries, wrote journals, where she chronicled things that had happened in her life, and they got stashed away, they got hidden, they never saw the light of day. But this is what they said. And Ciri James' argument for this is that with as much writing as Charlotte Bronte did, she finds it hard to believe that she didn't keep some kind of diary or journal during her life. So all of this is written from Charlotte Bronte's perspective. And honestly, I feel like she did a fantastic job with this book. I loved reading it, but I've already read two nonfictions about Charlotte Bronte's life. And, well, the Brontes in general. And from reading those and then reading this, there was, as far as I can tell, the information is very accurate to her life. And that was Ciri James's goal, is she wanted it to be accurate to her life. And she also wanted the way the diaries were written to reflect the way that Charlotte Bronte wrote. They didn't have to be exact, obviously, because it's impossible to capture another author's voice exactly. But she wanted to get as close as she could. And I felt like she did a really good job with that. So if you have an interest in the Brontes, I would highly recommend picking this one up. All right, the next book that I finished was Mort by Terry Pratchett. This is book number 4 in the Discworld, but book number 1 in the Death series. And this one I was looking forward to getting to because it was just a little bit further into the series, so I was hoping it'd be better than The Color of Magic. But honestly, I think I like The Color of Magic better. And I think the main reason is simply because the first third or so of the book was actually really good. I was really enjoying it. I enjoyed the humor. I didn't care for Mort so much, but I was enjoying the humor in the book. But then there was a plot device used. And it is a plot device that I personally do not care for. And the simplest way that I can put it is a character does something to try to prevent an inevitable thing from happening, which causes a whole bunch of problems that he then has to fix, but he wants to fix them in a way that he still gets what he wants, which is nigh on impossible. I don't care for that plot device at all. So unfortunately, I did not enjoy this book. I would take Color of Magic over Mort any day. Oh, and we finally made it to the end of January. The last book that I finished was At the Crossing Places by Kevin Crossley Holland. It's classified as a middle grade. I don't know if I call it fantasy or just magical realism, which I guess is technically fantasy. But this is the second book in the Arthur trilogy. And like I said, it is technically classified as middle grade. However, I would argue either very upper middle grade or YA. So this series in general follows a boy named Arthur who is 13 years old at the time of the first book. And he is living at the turn of the 13th century. And yes, I said 13th even though this is Arthur. He is living at the time right after Richard I dies and his brother John becomes King of England. And in this book, we have the character of Merlin. Everybody else is brand new as far as none of them existed in Arthurian legend. And Merlin gives Arthur an obsidian stone. The first book is called the Seeing Stone, and that's what it's named after. And when Arthur looks in this stone, he sees images. He can see and hear what was going on with King Arthur back in the 4th, 5th, 6th century. 5th or 6th century. So in the first book, he's growing up with his foster parents. In this book, he is living with another man, serving as his squire, hoping to eventually go on the Crusades, because that's what pretty much all the boys who want to be knights, this is what they want to do. They want to go on crusade. So that is his hope, to eventually be able to do that. I really enjoyed this book. I would say I enjoyed it as much, if not more, than the first book. Both of these books were very good, very enjoyable. They are written more as if Arthur is basically taking quill and paper and occasionally writing down, this is what happened today, or this is what happened yesterday. So they don't say like, dear journal, or they don't have dates on them or anything like that. It's like he just finds a few minutes alone, grabs a scrap of paper and starts writing down what happened recently. So the chapters are very short. It's very quick and easy to get through. And this book, as far as Arthur from Arthurian legend, this book has Arthur from the time he gets crowned king until, I shouldn't really say until. It basically covers a lot of the stories of the Knights of the Round Table that we're more familiar with. So Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, that story is in here, different things like that. So this book was probably my favorite in the series. We'll get to the third book in a minute. But I think it's mostly my favorite because I recognized a lot of the Arthurian legend stories. So there's that. All right. On to February. And yes, this is coffee and a book, so I have coffee with me. So the first book that I read in February was The Aeronaut's Windlass by Jim Butcher. This is the first book in the Cinder Spire series, and it is an adult sci-fi steampunk-ish book. I say ish because it has a steampunk feel, but instead of things being powered by steam, they're powered by crystals and ether, or ether silk. This book takes place in a world where the land of the planet is uninhabitable. People live in these spires that are a couple miles off the ground. And the spires are essentially a city or maybe multiple cities in and unto themselves. And one spire gets attacked by the other and sets off a whole bunch of stuff. And a group of very eclectic characters have to work together in order to try to find out if there is a traitor in their midst. So, I really enjoyed this book the first time I read it, but I think I actually enjoyed it more the second time. And the only reason I reread it is because it came out in 2015. I read it soon after I got it, and then the second book didn't come out until October of last year. And I didn't remember most of the book. So, hoping to continue on with the series this year, but I did enjoy my reread of this one. Okay, the next two books that I finished were both graphic novels, and the first was Lunar New Year Love Story by Jean Luen Yang. This is a standalone graphic novel, and it is, I believe it's YA, and I would call it probably magical realism. It is about a girl named Valentina who is obsessed with Valentine's Day, and she finds out that her family is cursed, that they are doomed to be unhappy and unlucky in love. And so she ends up making a deal with St. Valentine that she will have a year in order to either find love, or she will give him her heart, which he will protect so that she cannot be hurt from love. And honestly, it sounds like a story that could go in a variety of different ways. Some you may like, some you may not. She is in high school when this story starts. Actually, she's in high school and the story ends because she's in 11th grade. But this book covers so much more than just a love story, because we have different Asian cultures, we have different people dealing with different family problems and family dynamics. And I will say, as far as the romance goes, I love the way this book ended. So, this is one that I would highly recommend. And I am probably going to buy my own copy so I can reread it next year. The next graphic novel that I read was Wave Rider by Kazuki Buishi, which is the 9th and final volume in the Amulet series. I kept seeing these books in my library and thought, why not check them out? Honestly, it was a really fun series, and this was a really solid wrap-up to it. This story is about a girl and her brother and mom who move into her grandfather or great-grandfather's old house after her dad dies. And she and her brother end up stumbling upon a path to a different world. And they find out that one of them basically has inherited a stone from her grandfather, like a stone necklace, that she has to learn how to control. She has to learn how to use the magic that she's able to have through this stone. All right, my camera apparently quit recording, and I didn't notice until I'd finished filming. So if the camera moved, I apologize, but I have to keep talking about these books even though I talked about them once. So bear with me. So as far as Wave Rider, the only issue that I really had with the series for the most part was in the first 2 or 3 volumes, the main character was learning how to use the magic very quickly. Magic she's never seen before, magic she's never heard about before. But I have a feeling the reason for that is because it's a middle grade and it's a graphic novel. And so the author probably just pushed it along a little faster to start with so the reader wouldn't get bored. Because in the later volumes, it does slow down as far as how quickly she's learning how to use the magic. But that's my best guess. Otherwise, it's a really solid series. This book I thought was really well done, and it does leave it open for a potential spin-off series. I don't know if the author's already planning to do one or he just wanted to leave it open, but it is open. All right, the next book I finished in February was The Secret Adversary by Agatha Christie. I've read several Agatha Christie, and yes, I read two months in a row, but this was my first Tommy and Tuppence, and this was a roller coaster of a ride. I'm used to Agatha Christie's books being fairly steady paced, maybe a little bit on the slow side. This was not. This was very action-packed. So Tommy and Tuppence are two people who, at the beginning of this book, they're very close friends, but they're also very opposite of each other. Tuppence is very much an act now, think later. Tommy is more think for a while now and act later. And in the beginning of the book, Tuppence comes up with the idea to try to earn money because, employment's down, to basically hire themselves out to do whatever jobs people will pay them a decent price to do, or a decent wage to do. And they end up getting themselves hired to try to find a missing person. The woman who's missing was on the Lusitania when it was sinking. She received some papers, some very important papers, and after getting off the Lusitania, she disappeared, and so did the papers. So this takes place in the 1920s, a number of years after the Lusitania sank, but they still don't know where she is or the documents are. The next book that I finished in February was Alone by Megan E. Freeman. This is a middle grade book told in verse, and again, this one was very well done. It follows a girl who wakes up one morning after staying the night in her grandparents' apartment, unbeknownst to everybody else, wakes up the next morning to discover that everybody in the town is gone. Her dad thinks she's with her mom thinks she's with her dad, because that's where she told them she was going to be, and now everybody is gone. She has no idea where they went. She has no idea why they're gone. She just has to try to survive by herself, unless someone comes to save her. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I felt like the author did a really good job of trying to cover every possible thing that she might come up against, to really reason through why she was making the decisions that she was making. And it was a really good story. I really enjoyed it. The next one was Cyrano de Bergerac by Edmond Rostand, and this is a classic French play. I've read several French novels, but I never read a French play before. And this one I also really enjoyed. Cyrano de Bergerac was a real person, but from what I gathered at the beginning of this book that it covered on his life, there are things about his life in the play that are accurate, but specifically the romance does not seem to be. So in this play, Cyrano is in love with a woman, but he has, as far as he considers it, an abnormally large nose, and he doesn't think a woman like her would love him. So he doesn't try to woo her. He doesn't tell her how he feels. He just keeps it to himself. But there's another man named Christian who also really likes her, and she likes him. But Christian is not very eloquent with words, spoken or written. So Cyrano says, I'll write letters to her for you. And then the question in the play eventually becomes, is she in love with Christian, or is she in love with the writer of the letters? And the last book I read in February was Ariadne and the Legend of the Fire Rose by Christy A. Cole. This is the first book in the Landa Fiora series, and it's also a self-published debut. Now this book, it was good. I enjoyed my time with it well enough to see it through. Unfortunately, this is not really my kind of book. It's not a fairy tale retelling, but it has the feel of a lot of fairy tale retellings, especially kind of your standard retellings. It's good for what it is. Unfortunately, it's not my personal cup of tea, so I wasn't at all enthralled with it. But since I'm not really the target audience because this isn't really my thing, take my advice with, or take my opinion with a grain of salt, please. All right, that was it for February. So for March, the first book that I finished was Throne of Jade by Naomi Novik. This is the second book in the Temeraire series, which takes place during the Napoleonic Wars, but with dragons. And in the first book, we have the main character, Lawrence, who he is a Navy man. And when his ship attacks a French vessel, they find a dragon egg on it. The dragons are supposed to be matched with a rider soon after they're hatched. So someone is chosen at random, but when the dragon hatches, it wants nothing to do with that person and immediately latches onto Lawrence. So he has to leave his naval life behind to go be an aviator, as they call dragon riders in this series, and go to the commune where they keep the dragons, they train the dragons, all that kind of stuff, and learn all about the life of the aviators and leave everything he knew behind. And in this world, at least in England, the way everything goes with the dragons is People are fine to have the dragons fighting in their wars, but they don't really want to know anything else about the dragons or the aviators. So, Lawrence doesn't know much about this world going into it, and we get to learn right along with him. And this is such a good series. Honestly, I think I enjoyed this book just as much as the first one. And when I tell you that most of this book is traveling, it might surprise you, because it surprised me, but I still really enjoyed it. The next book was hard. The next book I read was The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp by Sarah Brunsvold. And when this story starts, Mrs. Kipp is entering a hospice care center because she has cancer. And it's discovered soon after that she has quite a story to tell. She's led quite the life, especially in the 60s and 70s. And so the person who discovers it asks her about telling her story, and she agrees to. So a reporter who's been working for the newspaper she's at for, I think, just over a year, ends up being hired to write the story. However, she is told that she's writing Mrs. Kipp's obituary, not her life story. There are reasons that will unfold later, but that's what she's being told. And so she's supposed to show up in the afternoons, talk to Mrs. Kipp, get to know her, get to know about her life, and write this piece on her. This is such a hard book, though. It probably makes sense when you consider it begins at a hospice center. You can probably guess why it's such a hard read. But it's also really, really good. I don't think I said, this is an adult Christian contemporary. And faith plays a very big part in this book. If you are someone who, like me, cries easily at books, keep a box of tissues close, because you're going to need it. All right, I said we'd get back to this book later, and it's later. So we have King of the Middlemarch was the next book that I finished. And this one is the third book in the Arthur trilogy. And I liked this book. It's a solid read. It's a great end to the series. However, I will say, for me personally, the story in this book, where the characters were, what was going on, was not as much of interest to me as what we got in the previous two books. So unfortunately, I would probably say this is my least favorite book in the series, but it wasn't a bad book. It was still a good book. I just personally wasn't as interested in the plot line, mostly the setting, really, of this book as I was the other two. But it's still a very good book. Apparently I need to back up. I'm getting too close to the camera. The next one was The Mother Tongue by Bill Bryson. And this one is a nonfiction book basically about the history of the English language and its usage, which I get it, probably sounds boring to a lot of people, but I like learning about these things. So I picked this one up at the library, and I thought it was a really interesting read. He does put in a lot of humor in the book, and I think that's part of what makes it easier to read and easier to get through. He writes it in what feels like a very approachable way, and honestly, I found it interesting learning all the information that he had. He covers things from how the English language got started to spellings, how spellings came about, how different areas spell things differently, how punctuation is used, all this kind of stuff. There was one chapter in the book I did not read, and that was the one on swearing, because I personally just don't care. So I didn't read it. But I really enjoyed the rest of the book. And if you have an interest in the English language, the history of the English language especially, and its usage, I'd recommend giving this one a try. However, I will warn before you pick it up that I did read one or two reviews that made comments along the lines of he leaned on myths and stories that aren't necessarily true or aren't believed to be true anymore. This book was published in 1990, early 1990s, if not 1990. And so some of it may have been that this was the information he had at the time. We know differently now, but this is the information he had. Some of it may be that he leaned on those myths because, well, we really don't know, so I'm just going to lean into that. I don't know. It was interesting reading about how the English language had spread and different things about the English language, especially on an international level, when this was all written. I don't know if you would say pre-digital age or at the very beginning of the digital age. And I would be very curious to see if someone put out a book on the English language since the digital age started, because I'm curious to know how much it's changed since then. All right, and the last book that I read in the month of March, the last book in this video, actually isn't even a book, it's a play, and that is Macbeth by William Shakespeare. This is probably my favorite tragedy by Shakespeare. Hamlet's up there, but I think part of the reason I enjoy Hamlet so much is because I've read it more than any other Shakespeare play, so I know it pretty well, whereas all the other plays I don't know as well. But this one's definitely up there. And if you don't know what this book is about, or this play is about a man named, obviously, Macbeth. He is a Thane in Scotland, but he ends up hearing a prophecy that he's going to become a Thane of another area in Scotland, as well as king. So how he goes about handling that information is the whole substance of the play. I will let you read it or watch it to find out how that all unfolds if you don't know. However, I think one of the biggest reasons that this one is my favorite, or at least amongst my favorites, is because of the prophecies. I really enjoy stories where the characters get prophecies and they either try to force them to happen because it doesn't seem like they will. They try to prevent them from happening, a la Oedipus Rex. Or they get a prophecy that just sounds like, oh, something like this could never happen. That's just way too complicated. But then it does. I love those types of stories. So I think that's the main reason I like this play and why I was drawn to it in the first place. All right, camera is still rolling and we made it to the end of the video. So hopefully I don't have to record anything else again. I hope you like this video. This is the first one I'm putting up on my channel. However, I am planning for the next 6 days, including the day this video goes up, to have one video up a day. After that, my schedule will change and I'll be doing every Monday and every even numbered Thursday. If you would like, let me know down in the comments below some of the books that you read in the last quarter, especially any particular favorites. If you've read any of the books that I talked about today, let me know what you thought about them as well. And I will see you tomorrow with another video.